Happy Friday. Welcome to today's Ethnic Media Services Zoom News Conference. I'm Pilar Marrero, Associate Editor of EMS and your moderator and co-organizer of this event. Today's briefing is mindful of the fact that we are in an election year in the United States and that right now, people in different states are voting in presidential primaries as well as state and local elections. In a little more than a week, we will have the so-called Super Tuesday, where when the largest number of states hold their primaries. Among the 16 states voting on March 5th are California, Texas, and North Carolina, among a long list. Experts believe that the Republican nomination will probably be clinched over the next few weeks, and in practice, the general election will begin. Turning out ethnic communities and people of color to participate in primaries and sometimes in general elections can be a difficult task. According to the Pew Research Center and other institutions, voters of color, including Latinos, African American, and Asian Americans, are less consistent voters than the white population. In other words, they tend to participate less percentage-wise. And this is why we are here. Often, people of color who are eligible to vote don't participate in elections because they may feel that their vote doesn't matter that much. They doubt that it really makes a positive difference in their day-to-day lives. That's why we invited a trio of community leaders and organizers to speak today, and who will tell us why voting is important as part of their work to make change happen. Community organizing to achieve specific gains for neighborhoods and disadvantaged populations is often linked to efforts to register and turn out low-propensity voters. There are a few reasons for that. The practice of knocking on doors and actively engaging with communities, fundamental to successful labor and community organizer, is equally crucial in electoral mobilization. Demonstrating how electoral participation directly connects to tangible outcomes, including electing policymakers who will help or defend gains or change a policymaker that doesn't help, serves as a powerful means to illustrate to individuals that their votes matter. Our panelists work in communities across the country and will talk about how the power of the vote can help generate change. Our speakers today are Ernie Serrano, Integrated Voter Engagement Organizer with Strategic Concepts in Organizing and Policy Education, SCOPE, in South Los Angeles. Debbie Chen, Houston-based community activist with the National OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates. And Anisha Hardy, Executive Director of Alabama Values. We ask our speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean, and we ask reporters to enter questions in the chat. We will send a video of today's briefing and expanded bios with contact information for each speaker to all participants later today. Our speakers are also encouraged to answer questions in the chat throughout the conference. I am asking our three panelists to speak and answer questions that we will moderate and to lead their comments, each of them telling us a little bit about the work they do in their respective communities, as well as how electoral participation affects long-term campaigns that they would be involved with. I'm going to invite Ernie Serrano. Please go ahead. Talk to us about what you do in the community, what SCOPE does in South LA, and why do you think telling voters that their vote matters is important, and what do you tell them? Please go ahead.
Okay, so I want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing me in this platform to also to highlight the importance of getting out the vote. So SCOPE, Strategic Concepts in Organizing and Policy Education, was came directly as a result of the 1992 LA uprising out here in South LA. And the reason that happened is that there had been decades of disenfranchisement, of just neglecting the community, resources being siphoned to to other regions as opposed to the community. You have big corporations that actually function out here in Los Angeles County. However, they don't reinvest back into the community, right? There was heavy policing. Um, there was what you call redlining. Everything that you can create, every condition you can create to create disparity in the community, what was actually implemented out here, and or in other sectors of California as well. So you have a lot of, especially when it comes to minorities, or like we said, and in particular out here, the districts that we cover, which is 8, 9, and 10, respectfully, there was, it's black and brown communities, right? That we essentially focus on. However, we are very aware because we have also other, alliances throughout California with many of our, brothers and sisters, like you said, of Korean descent, or or what have you. And so what we do essentially is bridge that gap. So in 1992, obviously there was a need. As a result of the uprisings, local leaders got together and says, you know what, something needs to be done. During that time, I don't know if any of you are aware of, which used to be Congresswoman Karen Bass had created Community Coalition. So, so our founder, Anthony Thigpen, or Scope, was also integral in creating and helped them raise that organization, which was also as a result of, the crack epidemic, right? They believed that they needed to um, find a solution, to try to bring close down crack houses. But the truth was that they found that the main problem was the local liquor store. The local liquor store was a one-shop stop that you can go there, you can buy everything you needed, all paraphernalia you needed for drugs or what have you. And so they began a campaign to shut local liquor stores down and create wholesome food marts, because any, there was not one wholesome food mart that you can find anywhere in South Central. Come the uprising, um, so we know that the city erupted, right? Their voice wasn't being heard. We had the Rodney King case. We have these officers who were blatantly, um, battering this guy, assaulting this guy, and you have film and all, but yet we're acquitted. So that was the last straw. Said, like, what, our voice doesn't matter. They don't care about us. The system's like, it's not designed for us, right? And so the local leaders at the time got together and said, you know what, in order to bridge that, we have to create another organization, or we have to bring all the local organizations to get involved. So SCOPE, what we stand for is, so we believe in policy, policy education to bring about change. We believe in equitable justice in the social, economic, and environmental fronts. So what we do is we do engage our communities. We do everything, every program that we can get in, if we have the capacity to involve ourselves in to bring about change, we do it on behalf of the community. However, one of our major policies is to, if we're going to affect social change, it has to be through the people that are mostly affected by it. That's our theory of social change, which is, we're the ones being directly impacted by the conditions, and we should be the ones at the forefront of the battle, so to speak. And also, we should have a place at the table with their elected leaders to have say in how you're governing our communities, because you have many leaders that were being elected because obviously we were not involved in the process, or being elected, that didn't really have any interest in the conditions, or hearing our voice. So we believe in creating the conditions in order for us, and setting the platform, which is called grassroots effort, to have a voice at the table. And it's like one of my colleagues says, one of the things that we always say says that if you don't have a place at the table, you know, then you're going to be part of the meal, right? And it's true. So that's taken place for many years. However, a lot of community members do not understand that everything is a process. So that's where we face difficulties. You have a community that's already disenfranchised, that's not really cared for, because we have from immigrants to um, women, and people of color that, for one reason or another, are not as informed in the policies, or the way the electoral government works. So we have to, give it that extra effort, tell them why it's important to vote. And so as myself as the innovative voter engagement coordinator, what slash or organizer, what have you, is everything that we do, I have to ensure that we can bring it into informing our community members as to why it's important to vote. And I think one of the major victories that I can say, at least in present time, like I mentioned, Karen Bass. I don't know if everybody's aware of who she is, but she ran for mayorship of LA. So she gave up her seat in Congress in order to come and become mayor of LA, or at least um, fight for the seat. She went against a billionaire, Rick Caruso, and I call them, part of the good old boy club. These are very wealthy people that wanted the mayorship of LA, right? And what I believe is not for the most, you know, um, honest reasons. Okay. Now, so she thought it was important enough for her to come back. She was grassroots. She's always been a grassroots leader to come back and fight for the mayorship to ensure that he didn't get it. Okay, I won't get into all the specifics of it, but I did take part in running one of the teams that was instrumental in ensuring that she won the campaign. So we went. So you have a grassroots leader with only $10 million in her overall, budget, that went against a billionaire that spent $109 million trying to get the mayorship of LA. Now, these are odds that, for the most part, historically, we have no one has ever been able to let's say to beat out. This is a lot of money. This guy was spending money in social media. Uh, every commercial that he could spend money on, he recreated her to the point that people thought she was an entirely different person than who she was. Right. So the odds were stacked against us, and I'm not even going to mention some of the other, less than desirable tactics that his canvassers and phone bankers were using. However, we were able, through grassroots effort, win the election, and we won substantially. And why was that? Why was that possible? When for all intents and purposes, he should have won the election with all the money that he threw into it, right? And all the support that he had from powerful allies that they have, right? All businessmen, and it's because he's part of the California Business Roundtable. So they should have won the election. Why didn't he win it? Because they didn't have a concept of what it was to reach the demographic that he needed to reach in order for him to gain the seat. Like I tell people, if he was really interested in LA and bettering the conditions, obviously, because out here we have the housing crisis, right, homelessness, and other and other issues, environmental issues that we're fighting against. If he would have just invested 15-20 million into the economy and really showed people that he really cared about them, he would have won the seat. I tell people. But the fact that he rather spent 109 million let you know that their motives were not necessarily for the LA residents.
Ernie, can I interrupt you?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
want to ask you a question.
Yes.
So this is very interesting, and all the historic context that you've given us is very, very important. Like I said in the introduction, Black and Brown communities and other people of color
Yes.
have less percentage-wise participation. So, for example, if 70% of whites participate in elections, then you go to you see the numbers for other communities and it's a lot lower. There are many reasons for that, including, whether or not they're citizens. There's also a lot of people who have given up on the system, right? And I'm sure you encounter them when you go out and knock on a door. Can you tell us a little bit whether or not you feel that the work that you've done in the community has increased political participation, I'm sorry, electoral participation in the community?
Oh, definitely. So I could give an example as one of the individuals that was also a grassroots activist as well, like in one of our local district representatives, like I'll say like Marquise Dawson. He came. The people showed up to vote for him, right? And he actually won his seat, and he's represented. I believe it was district. District 8 or 9 for many years. Okay, and that wouldn't have been possible if the people wouldn't have stepped up to vote on his behalf, or in this and also in respects to Karen Bass. She would have not won the mayorship of LA if people wouldn't have stepped up, to vote on her behalf. Because this is all grassroots effort. Another highlight I can give is right now. So California has, and the city of Inglewood has the most active oil drills anywhere in an urban city in the world. At least 3,000 active oil drills. The impact that these oil drills have had on community members, from cancer, chronic pulmonary diseases, asthma, unexplained nosebleeds or what have you, have been so detrimental that we have been advocating on behalf of the population or the community members to get these oil drills shut down. And through community efforts, we've been able to make that happen. Won victories at the local level, right? And also went to the city level. But right now, because we're dealing with the big money, now they're fighting and trying to create policy to keep some of these oil drills active. However, those that we've already won to get shut down, we want them shut down within a 5-year period. But they're trying to fight us and say, like, no, we give us 20 years to shut them down. You don't need 20 years to shut them down. And this was all done through grassroots efforts. So, but it is, for the most part, I think there's many factors that come into place when it comes to why people are not only disengaged from the voting process, but also disillusioned. And because minimum wage is alive and well in this region, as corporations, companies, and all, even the government, adjust for inflation, they never adjust the local paycheck for inflation. So they're having to make ends meet. That's one factor. Another one is that they don't believe the system was designed for us, that it's already rigged for the powers that be to win every election, right? But that's not necessarily true. Maybe at one time it was daunting, right? Especially if you take it back to the 50s and 60s, where we had the civil rights unrest and the protests, or even up to the 70s. Yeah, it was very difficult. These communities were marginalized. Um, Even banks were working towards not allowing us to be able to buy your own home. There's certain regions that you couldn't go to, that if you were a person of color or this, you already knew automatically you're going to go live in, whether it was in Watts, South Central, Inglewood, or what have you, right? So a lot of that, there's been gains in changing that, but not as fast or as we need it, right? There's always work to
Ernie,
be done. Yes.
thank you so much. We need to move to the other panelists, but there will be, and there is a question in the chat that maybe you can address in the chat. So can you stay with us so you can maybe,
Definitely.
okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ernie, so much for this very helpful explanation. It's very interesting. I'm going to move on to our second panelist, and that's Debbie Chen. She's coming to us from Houston. Hi, Debbie, welcome.
Hi.
Please go ahead and talk to us about, what you do, what kind of work you do in the community, and what's the link to electoral participation.
So OCA, I'm a part of the OCA National as well as the OCA Greater Houston chapter. And I'll just use, Greater Houston as the example, because we're kind of like an example of what our other chapters around the country do. Nationally, we were formed in 1973. Locally in Houston, we were formed in 1979. And a large part of what we do, we are essentially a social justice, civil rights advocacy organization. And regarding civic engagement and the importance of voting, for us, it actually starts with the census. It's not just simply, come election time, go vote, because the census and the redistricting that happens, redistricting is actually the best way to conduct mass voter suppression, right? Because that redistricting process, well, let's just say with the census determines how many people get counted, and then redistricting is determining who gets to govern those different areas, right? And who gets to vote in certain areas. And from a practical standpoint, who gets to determine how the money gets spent in your particular area? And I point to the money because sometimes, around every 10 years, right, we do census work, and it's about, oh, everybody, needs to be counted. It's so important to be counted. But for the average, immigrant, because the majority of the AAPI community is actually first generation immigrants, and similarly to other communities, right? Just the importance of being counted, that message alone doesn't necessarily resonate or translate into other languages in the same meaning and context. But when you approach it from the perspective of, every person who gets counted, this determines how much money of your tax dollars comes back to your community. When you talk about money, money is like the universal language. Everybody understands money, right? So I'll just say in Houston, that dollar sum was $15,700. So it was very easy to go say to someone, you need to be counted. And what is redistricting? Redistricting is you're getting to decide who gets to spend that money on your behalf, who makes the decisions of how things are spent, right? And then that ties to voting. When you vote, you're getting to decide or having an impact on who's making those decisions of what to spend that money on and how that directly impacts where you live, right? Whether it's where the roads get built, where the schools get built, which areas get nice sidewalks and which areas have open ditches. Like, those are all things that literally come down to, do you vote? Because voting is essentially it cuts across money, it cuts across your investment, because your vote essentially gives you power. And power is one of those words that we try in terms of our cultural organizing and community organizing around the importance of voting. Is power is not a word to be afraid of. Power is simply the ability to influence things, to get things done, right? That's all it is. There's nothing to be afraid about that. And voting is how you get power. And so, we're always telling people, voting is power, right? The ability to get things done. And this is why your community is so important to be involved. And for the AAPI community, we are literally the fastest growing community, percentage wise. Most people don't realize that. In Texas, the AAPI community, I'll just say for the greater Houston area, we increased at a 74% rate in Texas, right? And especially in the greater Houston area. Whereas the overall rate for citizens of voting age, population only increased by 21%. So that's a huge difference. Of the 550,000 AAPIs just in greater Houston area, 300,000, almost 300,000 are citizens of voting age. And because our community traditionally hasn't, known about the importance of voting, many people, as first generation immigrants, they're coming from countries where it's not necessarily the best thing to go vote or to go, speak up. You could be disappeared. That's a real thing. A lot of people who come here as first generation immigrants, they didn't go to school here to understand the system, right, and not understand the whole voting and electoral process. So it's that double layer that in the AAPI community we have to spend that extra time to educate people about why it's important to vote, because you actually in America have the ability and have the power to be able to make changes or influence policies that are going to impact your community. And so because our community hasn't been as active in the past, we're steadily increasing. That means it's a community that's kind of up for grabs, regardless of which party, or where you fall on the political spectrum. Neither party, frankly, have traditionally invested in doing outreach to the AAPI community. And that is literally just leaving votes on the table, right? So while the API community may be a smaller percentage nationwide, in some states and some cities, we have a higher concentration. In some areas, like in Greater Houston, there are certain pockets of concentration where the API community and the API vote can literally be that margin of difference when it comes to these closer races. And it's a kind of open market of opportunity for candidates and parties to look at. Here's a untapped pool of people who could be voting, right? And it should come down to who has the best policy ideas, who's actually got the better plan to actually get work done. I'll leave it at that in terms of, you know, the importance of voting. Literally, it is making sure that, you know, our people get counted, that we don't get racially gerrymandered out to where we, you know, our vote becomes diluted. And making sure that, you know, people understand when you're voting, it is about wielding power and influencing who gets to decide how your tax dollars gets invested in your community.
Debbie, thank you so much for that context. It's very helpful. Can you maybe point to an issue that has mobilized API voters in recent years or in recent times?
You know, in recent times, during COVID, right, there was a lot of inflammatory language that was, you know, put out by the previous administration that literally scapegoated and blamed COVID on the AAPI community, blamed it on the Chinese community. That in turn really impacted a lot of people just flat out experiencing fear. People, elders being, you know, physically attacked and beaten, you know, women in Atlanta that were, you know, literally murdered. It's generated a lot of fear. That was a huge motivating factor, along with other issues of, you know, just jobs and economic security. A lot of, you know, AAPI community members are small business owners, right? And why does the AAPI community start small businesses at a faster rate? Frankly, it's because they don't necessarily have the same opportunity to be able to move into, you know, mainstream corporate America, to be able to move into management. We do, you know, suffer from stereotypes of like, you know, you're great workers, but, you know, you're not necessarily management material. And so a lot of people will go and do their own, you know, business, or they experience discrimination for having an accent, for being limited English proficient, even though they have the same, you know, capability, you know, education, experience to be able to be successful. They don't necessarily, you know, have those opportunities. So, you know, economics and jobs, you know, access to healthcare, those were all really important things that, you know, you saw a huge surge in the 2020 election cycle. You saw an increase in the 2016 election cycle, you know, above average for the API community turnout. And that was literally nationwide.
Great, great. You were talking about earlier about leaving votes on the table, you know, that the parties are not investing in turning out communities, ethnic communities, and that happens with Latinos as well. Do you think now we have primaries, right? So people think about the general election, but now you have primaries, but it's not just the presidential primary. You have state elections, you have local elections. Here in California, we have a very important, you know, like statewide initiative about mental health. We have a very important local initiative here in LA about public, you know, street safety, safety of the roads. I have to elect a new city council member here in my area where I live. But there seems to be a lower interest from the community in primaries. Do you know why that is?
You know, I can speak for the API community, and that a lot of people just don't even understand the process, right? They don't understand how important primaries are, or that, you know, the primary is essentially you're determining who gets to be on the ballot in the general election. And that's why, you know, things like this talk today is so important. And, you know, ethnic media, I really thank everyone for being here, because you all, as our ethnic media, essentially you are the communicators to making sure that our communities, understand the process, understand why these are important, because most people like, oh, it's the presidential election year, or it's the governor or the mayor, like these big races, when in fact, things that are going to impact people's lives are really all these down ballot, races, these, local, officials, right? How many people, understand what a judge, does, like these different layers, right? In Texas, judges are all elected. So you have all these different layers, or, what does a county commissioner do? What does a city council member do? People don't understand that these are the entities and the positions that actually are the ones that are going to spend money or decide, how money is spent and where it gets invested in different neighborhoods. And so that's great if you want to come out because it's a presidential election or it's a mayor, but you need to have, a team of people there, right? The city council members, or all the commissioners, the county judge. Like there are all these other things that impact in Texas, the sheriff. People just need to understand that better. And I think that if people had, a better understanding of the impact of what all these different, layers of, government do and how it impacts their daily lives, then we would have more interest in and understanding. And frankly, we would have more people come out to vote and be involved.
Yeah, there's a lot of need for voting education. I was talking to a local activist in the API community here in LA, and she was telling me about, even and we know that in California and in LA, we have voting information in many languages, but sometimes people don't even know it's there. So they don't know to look it up, or, sometimes the voting, the polling places have not very clear information, stuff like that. So there's all of details that doesn't help give communities the trust to participate. I'm going to move on to our next panelist, and then we'll come back to some questions in the chat. If you see anything, Debbie, that you can answer, that'll be great. Thank you so much for your insight. And I wanted to invite Anisha Hardy, Executive Director of Alabama Values, to talk to us about the same issue. Thank you so much for being with us, Anisha.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. But yes, my name is Anisha Hardy. I am the Executive Director of Alabama Values, which is a grassroots communications organization, and Alabama Values Progress, which is a media advocacy organization. And I'm looking forward to just discussing this critical relationship between electoral participation and community engagement and how we can empower young voters, and voters from marginalized communities who often feel that their voice, their vote doesn't make a difference. And, in my work, I frequently encounter young voters questioning the impact of their vote. My response is always this. Voting is not just about choosing a candidate. It is about shaping the future of our communities. It is about, it's a powerful tool for expressing, our values and driving change. And in our Alabama Values, we really emphasize this message through our public education campaigns that typically target Black, Hispanic and LGBTQ plus voters ages 18 to 35. We strive to really make voting relatable by connecting it to issues that matters to them, such as social justice, healthcare, education, just really connecting voting to what we call kitchen table issues. And we strive to convey this message through narrative campaigns that leverage the power of culture so that these voters can see themselves in the solution. And so how do we make communities understand the value of their vote? And I think that's what we're talking about here, right? And it really starts with narrative and messaging, in my opinion. Who controls the narrative controls the power. So how do we craft messages that resonate, that highlights the direct impact of policy decisions on their lives? And narratives that connect the dots in this way. And by connecting the dots between voting and these tangible community outcomes, we can inspire actions in civic participation like voting. And, and the relationship between voting and the change that we want to see in the community, I'm glad that we're talking about this because it's critical. Voting is the foundation of civic engagement, enabling communities to push for the change that they want to see. It's not, as I mentioned, it's not just about, casting a ballot. Debbie, I really appreciate you bringing up the intersection of census and redistricting and voting. In Alabama, our recent victory in the Alabama, Milligan redistricting case is just a testament to the power of the collective effort around understanding this connection. And we saw over the past 2 years during this fight, we saw policy advocates, civic organizations, and community members come together to fight and win fair maps in our state, which we will be voting on, fair maps, this upcoming election. But this collaboration, it became a blueprint for how we were able to mobilize voters and ensure their presence at the polls. It became a blueprint and an on-ramp for folks who just did not see themselves getting into the fight. And however, I do want to point out, even with that, there are still challenges. There are a lot of voter suppression tools that are out there, in states that are also hindering, voter turnout. Right now in our state legislature, we're battling a legislation, Senate Bill 1. We're calling it the anti-absentee, absentee ballot bill. But pretty much, this bill will make it a criminal penalty, a felony, to assist someone with their absentee ballot. And so we're, even in the midst of trying to get people out to vote, we're fighting to ensure that everyone has adequate access to the ballot. It's just literally a battle for every essence of our democracy. And then I want to point out disinformation and misinformation. Um, you know, these are significant threats, to voter education and GOTV efforts. It's a recent article that I contributed to with Capital B News that highlighted the deceptive tactics that are being used to confuse and suppress Black voters in states like Louisiana, Alabama. And it's just a stark reminder of the need for us to just be vigilant, and the importance of us to provide accurate and reliable, information. And some of the ways that my organization, as a grassroots communications organization, that we have done that in the past, and we continue to engage voters, in the present, we leverage the power of storytelling. Storytelling is our first language. It literally moves across culture and time, and stories really humanize complex issues and make abstract concepts like democracy, civic participation, voting, census, redistricting more relatable. And by sharing these personal narratives that counter some of the apathetic or negative narratives that we were saying, we can really illustrate a direct impact of voting on an individual's, on their lived experiences, making the electoral process more meaningful, to the community. We're also partnering with organizations in our state on launching educational workshops that will provide, clear and accessible information about the voting process, to just empower community members to participate confidently. Sometimes people don't show up to the polls or get involved in the process because there's a knowledge gap on how even to, move through the process, right? And then also at Alabama Values, we're also leveraging, digital organizing tools to engage and mobilize young voters. Social media is a powerful tool for reaching and engaging, a broad audience, but particularly younger voters. And by creating, we believe that by creating content that resonates with the community's values and concerns, that we can encourage a dialogue that really motivates action. In 2022, we launched what we call a micro-influencer GOTV campaign to really test out the ways that we could repackage voting to increase turnout amongst young voters. Data in our state, we found that in 2020, that Alabama voters under 45 accounted for 1.7 million of the voting age population. but only 50% of those voters turned out to cast ballots, compared to 70% of the 2.1 million 45 plus voters. So in total, 1.4 million eligible Alabama voters did not vote. However, voters under 45, they represent a notably more diverse population of voters by race and ethnicity compared to voters over 45 in our state. And so we just believe that it is essential for us that we facilitate a shift in our get out the vote messaging and efforts to really test out ways that we can mobilize this voter base, the younger voter base. And this year, we're also excited to announce that we have partnered with Progress Now, which is the national affiliate of state-based communications hubs, similar to Alabama Values across the country, to develop and launch a mobile app called Megaphone to help combat misinformation and disinformation. And just some of the key highlights of that is to centralize, it can serve as a centralized information hub for content, providing, users with a one-stop shop for reliable and up-to-date information on community issues. And as I mentioned, this is a collaboration with other state-based communications hubs. So it gives us an opportunity to deploy and disseminate hyperlocal issue, advocacy messaging. I do also, and hopefully I'm doing, good on time. But I do
Yeah,
also,
just wrap up.
okay. So I do also want to point out that, the media plays a critical role. So I'm glad that we're having this call, encountering misinformation and disinformation, and just really maximizing the get out the vote efforts. In addition to the support that we provide to civic and grassroots organizations, we also work with local and regional media partners to create educational content that demystifies the voting process and provides clear instructions, on the ballot. And the last point that I would make, I do want to close out with just encouraging us to really shift the narrative in the way that we frame Black voters or marginalized voters, community of color voters or young voters that may feel that their voice doesn't matter. Because the notion that these voters, abstain from voting because they feel their vote doesn't matter is, in my opinion, an oversimplification that really fails to acknowledge the deeper issue at play. I think it's critical to recognize that many of these voters are disappointed, not because they, undervalue their vote, but because they are aware of the systemic injustices and political failures that persist, despite their participation in the electoral process. And their skepticism is often, rooted in their lived experiences and seeing promises, unfilled and witnessing the slow pace. And so I think to truly engage these voters, that we must address their legitimate concerns that they have about the democratic process and really work to build a more responsive political system, media system, to really shift, the narrative. And I have some points of how we could do that, but I'm going to wrap up here and just say,
Yes.
please reach out and connect. I would love to connect with you around the work that's happening in the state and across the South around, GOTV efforts, and just connect you with some of our partners on the ground that are doing this work, and have data on, some of the community listening sessions that have been taking place across our state.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Anisha. That was a very complete summary of all the work that you guys are doing with other organizations. I just wanted to bring up a question before we move to questions for all of you to close. Your state has been in the news this week because of the Alabama Supreme Court decision around frozen embryos. And I'm wondering, of course, we know that reproductive rights has become a big issue, and there are many efforts to limit reproductive rights, including possibly a national abortion ban if there is the Republicans come back to full power. So overturning abortion rights, how is that impacting women voters in Alabama, especially in the African American community?
Yeah, so this has been one of those intersectional issues that has really been pulling the collective together, because people in Alabama and probably in most states are issue fatigued. And so this has provided an opportunity for us to talk about, poverty, reproductive rights, the Black maternal mortality rate in our state, and how this impacts women, to talk about all these things in an intersectional way, so that when we're talking to our legislators, so that when we're standing in solidarity and educating the community and holding rallies and protests, we're doing it collectively. So this has been, much like redistricting was, reproductive justice has also been kind of like a unifying issue that we've been able to kind of rally the base around, and point out that this is why representation matters, and this is why your vote and your voice matters.
Thank you. I want to ask a question of the three panelists, and starting with Ernie and going to Debbie and then to Anisha. What issues resonate with young people in your communities? Ernie.
One of the major issues that resonate with the young people in our community is opportunity. There's not enough jobs. You have youngsters graduating and don't know what to do with their time. And so that's one of the things that we're also, in the middle, trying to see if we can create alliances with other corporations through, and involving them with our organization, getting them to come over here, share with us workshops that they do, or share with us, their details about their industry or what have you. But that is one of the major difficulties that we're having here. For the most part, our communities are, like I said, marginalized. So there's a lot of unemployment. There's minimum wage jobs that because LA is so expensive to live in, that it also creates it's created a vacuum for also what we call gentrification, right? So that's one of the major things that I can say, that and just different outlets for them to be able to invest their time productively.
Do you see that as an issue that will mobilize young voters in this year's elections?
Yes,
Definitely.
no opportunity. And as I mentioned, I think young folks are just calling. They're like, "Hey, we need you all to address the legitimate concerns that we have. Fix this democratic process. Work to build a more inclusive and responsive political system." They're very disappointed, and they have they have questions and answers, and so that opportunity, that is what's going to mobilize voters. They are tired of hearing, "Come out and vote because your ancestors died and fought for you to do it." They are tired of hearing that just a blanket statement of "your vote matters," when they're seeing in real time things that can, for anybody who can see, is saying that it might, there are issues even after you vote. So, I definitely think starting to find a way to communicate where the opportunity lies for us to get the country back onto our state, on the state level and federal level. Yeah, that is where young people, that is the sense that I'm getting as we talk to young voters.
Yeah, Ernie, can you mute, because we're getting all the sound. Debbie, do you have anything to say about this?
I would echo what they've said. Some of the young people that we've worked with, opportunity is a concern. Here in Texas, we've had a whole slew of, anti-trans type of bills. Abortion is or access to abortion is an issue. Gun violence is a very big issue with younger people. And just like personal safety is a very big issue for younger people.
Henrietta, you had a point there about Alabama, or a question. I think that's very important. Can you ask your question?
I don't see it.
Henrietta Burrows, are you on?
I think I see it. How
Yeah.
old does one have? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Yes, she was talking about, how do you tell young voters that if their individual vote was not that important, there wouldn't be a concerted effort to make it so difficult for people of color to vote with redistricting efforts, for example? And how old does anyone have to be to vote in Alabama?
Yes. So, the voting age is 18 in Alabama. And what we're finding with the message, because that is a message that we hear not just in Alabama, but just frequently, that if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying to stop it. But then also, young voters, when we talk about understanding, power dynamics. We talk about understanding what we're dealing with in our country, where a lot of laws and policies, and particularly in our state, are being used to uphold what we call like white supremacy ideology or things that really suppress and further disenfranchise, marginalized communities. And so even when we say that to these voters, they immediately go to, okay, but the power dynamics. So like, I guess, and that's what I mean by they have the questions and they have the answers. And they're able, and the reason that states like, Alabama are able to suppress the vote in this way and put forth bills like Senate Bill SB1 that will make it a felony to help someone with their absentee ballot. It's because they hold a lot of power, like in our supermajority. I mean, I want to point out that just in the country, period, like there was a Pew Research poll that came out that showed that white men make up 30% of the US population, but hold over 66% of all elected offices across state. And then in the South, you have all of these supermajorities. And so again, when we talk about this fight, where, to hold on to the minority rule, and we talk about these states where bills are being passed on a state level that are impacting the quality of life. Because I tell people, politics is local. It happens local, right? And so, that message of if your vote wasn't important, it wouldn't be an effort to stop it, does not ring true because they have the power to continue to launching and rolling out these coordinated efforts to dilute the vote.
How effective are the voter suppression efforts, do you think, in reducing voter participation? We know in recent elections, we've had recent national elections in 2022 and I think 2020, we had record participation of many communities, and yet we had very intense efforts of voter suppression. Anyone that wants to, throw into the, do you think that what the work you do actually counteracts these voter suppression efforts?
Oh, I would say definitely if we wouldn't be out here doing the work that we do, the conditions would not have changed. And obviously through years of like continued disenfranchisement and just the exploitation of resources and all, I believe that we would fall into a dire state of just where we could create more conditions for crime, more conditions for our cities to actually look like third world countries. It's ongoing, right? So the opposition, they're very, not only do they have unlimited funds, and they're well orchestrated, and and they will, despite having the funds, despite having the orchestration, despite being in one of the best positions possible, they will also resort to some of the dirtiest tactics possible, right? So if we weren't out here kind of countering that and pushing against it, no doubt in my mind, we'd continue to be where some of our communities were on the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So so there is incremental change. However, it's not fast enough. So the idea is, so at least from my perspective, there's no other way around it. We have to be able to bring our community members to the voting box, right? Or to fill out their voting ballot and mail it in, because without it, the option is not one that we want to entertain.
Thank you, Ernie. I have a question for all of you three of you. How do you all see the growing language of hate talk becoming normal, in our communities and in the media, in social media, in politics? And how will that affect people's participation? Will that keep people from voting? Debbie?
I think it's a threat to democracy, for the normalization of hateful language, and moving away from like a civil type of discourse. I can tell you, during the 2020 election here in Houston, right, you literally had people in trucks driving around to polling locations in an effort to intimidate people. The type of SB1, voter suppression bill, has already been passed in Texas. We're involved in a lawsuit around it. It doesn't bode well for a democracy overall if you're continuing to have this type of language allow to just essentially, polarize people, where you're just focused on this, emotional type of, emotion-based attacks versus, actually trying to, have real conversation to figure out solutions.
Thank you, Debbie. Anisha?
Yeah, so I think we have to also turn to the historical context of what this hateful rhetoric is rooted in, and and then also look at the base that is being rallied by this hateful rhetoric. And I do think that that is in itself is a voter suppression tool. I think that, we have to continue to counter those messages. And that's why I say that narrative and messaging is so important, and who controls the narrative controls the power. I think that's the work that we have to do as organizations. And I also want to point out that the work that we do as organizations is currently under attack. If we follow the narrative drumbeat and if we follow the bills that are being passed, they are dismantling the power that we have organically start to build to navigate some of these systemic barriers, where it's no longer being able to help voters fill out an absentee. In Atlanta, where there is now making it illegal to have a bail fund that is funded by nonprofits, whether it's now attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion. In my state, we're battling a bill right now that was introduced this week, prohibiting that. And so now you're creating an environment that is literally scaling us back to a time in our country's history where everyone did not have a voice, scaling us back to a time in our country's history where that hateful rhetoric was normalized. It was normalized. It had faith-based undertones, all type of things. And so we have to really look back and just really take a honest assessment of what this is really truly rooted in, and have those hard, complex discussions about what we are seeing resurfacing in our country and how it is impacting communities of color.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Ernie. I was just going to tell you, go ahead.
Actually add to that, right? And it's true. So racism and it's all been institutionalized. I remember I've seen movies where talking about, oh, you're not a good Christian because you're hanging out with the black. This is, what one, white member is telling another, right? So, but it's all designed for like I call it the good old boy club, because, that's how they created this and founded this country, to maintain power. So they're going to maintain power at any cost, right? And that's one of the strongest tools they've used is racism, institutional racism. And the only way you really can't combat it is through example, and not just when it happens. I think what we do here collectively is that we have a presence in the community. And post-COVID, we're trying to, and continue to enhance our presence in the community and have non-transactional interaction also with our community members, right? So they can know that we're here for you. We're here on your behalf. We need you to help us continue to, with the fight. And anytime that there's whether it's racism or anything that's any type of hate talk, we stay at the forefront of it and try to stifle it out before it grows into a wildfire or what have you. But it's an ongoing process, ongoing work, and but it's working with our allies and all to continue with like I said, with our own narrative and our message to our community members.
That's a good tone in which to end, because it's noon. But I just wanted to invite our director, Sandy Close. She wants to say a few words. Thank you all.
I've just been listening so intently and wanting to commend our speakers for the work you do, because you really keep the flame burning. There are times when the language of hate coming from political leaders at all levels has become so pervasive and, as you say, normal, that you wonder, where is the space left to bring people together, to find the common ground? Because the hate represents, as Debbie said, growing polarization. And what you're doing the work you're doing, outreaching, high touch communication, giving people a sense that what they think and what they care about as expressed in voting really matters and can be transformative. You're the real source of my hope as a journalist. So thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you. And
Thank you.
we are done, and happy weekend to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having
Thank
us.
you.
Go
Yeah, thank you
vote.
for the platform. Yes, everybody
Make
go
sure you go
vote. It
vote.
matters. And
Go
even
vote,
one
go
makes a
vote.
big difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Be safe.
Goodbye.
Thank you.